Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Kevin O'Connor from HashiCorp. Thanks for joining. You're the early birds. We're just going to give it a few minutes, let folks kind of wrap up, whatever meetings they have going on, and we'll probably get started here at about 12:03 Eastern, so about 2.5 minutes. All right, thanks all for joining. So we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Hopefully, everyone who's joined or who planned on joining has been able to or will shortly. But I'm Kevin O'Connor. Nice to meet you if I haven't met you before. I am a solutions engineer here at HashiCorp. And today, myself along with my colleague Tavi Orwa will be delivering this session to provide an overview, and we'll deep dive in certain areas on our HashiCorp Validated Designs for Vault. So this is meant to give you an introduction to the documentation, essentially what it is, how it can be used, and then we'll deep dive in a few areas and provide kind of detailed examples on the very sort of pointed recommendations that we make in these documents. Additionally, I know some of you may be interested in the free lunch that we advertise as well too. So Dania from our marketing team will be sharing the code. There's an Uber Eats code for your lunch in the chat. She'll be sharing that in the chat just in a little bit. And then we also have other colleagues from the HashiCorp side as well too that are on that are available in chat to answer questions. So we've got a few other solutions engineers, Patrick and Dan from our side, who will be able to help out with whatever questions that you have. So if we could, kind of direct your questions into the chat, and we'll get them answered there, sort of in real time as we're going on with the presentation. And then we should have some time at the end as well too to be able to address anything that's outstanding. So just to give a quick kind of overview of the agenda, we'll go over what these HashiCorp Validated Designs or HVDs, what they're all about, and there's a few different flavors that apply to different stages of maturity within Vault, as well as some additional detail on how you can apply them in your planning for Vault, and then kind of day-to-day operations of the platform thereafter. Right, and I'll make note now that we're dealing with the enterprise offerings of Vault. So you may hear us say HCP Vault, which is the HashiCorp Cloud Platform offering. We may say Vault Enterprise, which is our self-hosted option, right? But in either case, they're synonymous, and the recommendations within our HVDs apply equally to both. Sorry, Taby, you there?
Apologies, sorry. So the HashiCorp Validated Design offers our practitioners opinionated guidance for achieving production-grade deployments of Vault, right? And these designs are purpose-built for delivering foundational Vault use cases with a baseline level of architectural and operational maturity. Now, we expect that these assets that we provide to you via the HVD will help you reduce your onboarding time by eliminating that confusion and reducing that cognitive load around architectural and process topics. Now, they also aim to provide clear guidance, and we hope that they will be utilized as a part of your onboarding processes, as well as in your ongoing maturity with Vault. Overall, we expect and we hope that the HVD guide is going to be critical to ensuring that you all understand how to build the right workflows that set you up for success with a Vault service. The idea here being is the faster we can get you past the initial sticking points, sooner you can start to realize value with the service.
Thanks, Taby. And so we have two HVDs out for Vault today. So the first one that I'll touch on is the Solution Design Guide, which covers a lot of the aspects related to, kind of the install for our self-hosted enterprise products, as well as some additional detail on sort of initial configuration, which apply to both self-hosted and cloud. And we have these guides out as well too today for Terraform, Vault, and Console. But taking a look, inside, like what it's all about, right? This is basically the kind of guide that you may expect from a services or implementation team, right? Where we're providing sort of clear definitions on the various architectural components of Vault Enterprise and the various deployment architectures that are available, really focusing on sort of the preferred deployment architecture with high availability, right? Something, typical of a 3 to 5 node cluster, say spread across 3 availability zones if you're deploying in cloud, right? Within this, we also have deployment guidance, right, where we outline roles and responsibilities of the recommended team to deploy Vault, along with kind of the level of access that would be needed to perform the deployments, right? And in my experience, that's great. I mean, this is something that my customers ask about all the time is like, okay, we understand Vault from a sort of technology and capability perspective, but what about the people side, right? Like who is needed? What's the typical team that's going to be needed to support Vault on an ongoing basis? That sort of a thing. So we have some great recommendations in the HVD to speak to that. And then finally, implementation, right? Where it's not just theory, but we're actually providing guidance that's backed by modules that are created by our teams, right? So giving you something tangible that you can use to actually deploy Vault. And so go figure, we have Terraform modules to enable more of an automated installation. And then we have kind of a process for manual options as well too, to kind of walk you through that if you choose not to use Terraform. And so at the end of the day, right, what do we get out of all of this, right? Ultimately, as Taby was kind of highlighting, we expect our customers to be able to save significant time and effort in onboarding Vault Enterprise, shortening that time to value. Then of course, it's an architecture that's backed by us, right? It's been vetted by HashiCorp, right? Which ultimately should reduce our customers' risk and cost due to outages, right? Really helping them to scale securely. And finally, from a support perspective on our side, it's easier for us to support you, because we'll know, more or less exactly how you're deployed if you've followed and used the HVD as part of your initial installation and configuration.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Vault operation guide for adoption. So for the duration of this Lunch and Learn, we will be focusing on the adopt phase of the maturity model. Do stay tuned for the operating guides for the later maturity phases. We are working to have those published. Now, in that adopt phase of the maturity model, the emphasis is on the customers who are just starting their journey with an aim to improve their security posture by reducing that secret sprawl and centralizing your secrets management. Now, when we look at the standardized phase, you're probably seeking to expand the availability of the secrets management platform to accommodate a much wider and complex range of development team and use cases. Then we end up at the scaling phase, right? And by this point, you've probably progressed through adopting and standardizing. And by no means are these phases particularly linear. They're just a template to kind of outline what this would look like. And so when you talk about scaling, your focus is on maximizing Vault's potential. You're focusing on deploying across regions and clouds and ensuring things like high availability, performance optimization, and disaster recovery readiness.
All right, thanks, Taby. Yeah, so as she mentioned, for the remainder of today's session, we have the Vault operating guide for adoption that's out today. So like she said, stay tuned for additional guides for the other phases of maturity, as well as, there will be some integration guides as well too, partner guides. If you were on our session last week, right, we talked about Terraform integration guides with Prisma Cloud by Palo Alto, right? So there will be things like that coming out for Vault as well too. But as far as actually getting into the contents of the HVD itself, right, in this operating guide, there are 7 main sections, right? So we've got obviously just kind of the info graphic, I should say, of the cover page. But then here below in yellow are the different sections within the HVD. And so starting off with the introduction, right, we just talk about sort of the prerequisites that are needed, which really is, ensuring that you have an understanding of, our take on the cloud operating model and the aforementioned solution design guide in the applicable sections within that, right? And then there's some, language and definitions, like these sorts of terminology that you should be familiar with as you move on in the document. We also look to call out business objectives and functional objectives that many organizations strive towards to inform their overarching direction and fulfill their broader goals when they're rolling out Vault as a platform and a program, right? So these are kind of high-level overarching business objectives like enhancing security and improving operational efficiencies, mitigating risk, governing data, right? Maybe you're looking to hit certain compliance standards like your ISOs and NISTs and FIPS and SOX, or looking to adhere to CIS standards, those sorts of things, right? And then we actually have more kind of tactical functional objectives like, are you looking to create a program for centralized secrets management, right? Are you looking to ensure identity-based authentication across your organization? Maybe you're looking to build, more or less an encryption as a service platform, right? Where you can have folks sort of send Vault data to be encrypted and have it returned back, as well as kind of touch on operational objectives like obviously ensuring high availability, making sure audit trails and logging are set up for the system and things along those lines. Finally, and one of my favorite parts of this section is actually us including a sample project plan for implementing Vault, right? So we're actually looking to provide project managers with data that they can incorporate into their project plans to hit these different goals, right? So essentially like those sorts of things that should be included in a plan for successful, kind of rollout and adoption of Vault as a service, right? And I love that, right? Because I mean, it all starts at the beginning, right? And I don't know, I feel like that's like a Yogi Berra quote or something, but that's just sort of the way that it came out. But making sure essentially that you have a well-documented project plan, right, with sort of clearly defined deliverables is very important to rolling out an effective program, right? I know personally, and maybe some of you, that are on the line with us, right, we've all had sort of great project managers and project plans, and I'm sure many of us have had, project plans that weren't so great, and you probably saw the impacts on the actual project itself, right, due to sort of lack of planning, right? So that's really what we're looking to address and call out here in the beginning to make sure that, everyone is aligned and we have kind of clear focus moving forward to build out an effective program. So, after the introduction, like all good things, we start with people and process. there was a great former CEO of mine who used to always say, you know, he would kind of build out this triangle, right? It's people, process, and then technology, right? And the order of importance should follow that sort of a flow, right? And I'm sure, you know, as many of you know, changing kind of culture and internal process can be difficult, right? As can your sort of organizational and political challenges internally, right? So it's important to kind of rethink, you know, how an important platform technology such as Vault is positioned and offered, right? If we want it to be successful. And we say this and we kind of start our document out this way because, you know, we think our observations across the industry have given us a glimpse into what good looks like, right? You know, for a secrets and identity management platform, right? When thinking about it from both, you know, a people and technology standpoint, right? So that's kind of what we get into in this section. And it all starts with talk about the internal developer platform, which many of you might have heard kind of out in the industry, right? It's become, it's become kind of talk of the town lately, right? Which more or less, you know, in my opinion, is kind of synonymous with, you know, a shared service model in building for self-service, right? Essentially, the question is, you know, kind of comes down to how can a platform team, you know, work with developers to build golden paths that, you know, development teams can consume in sort of a self-service mode, right? So that's what we look to solve for, specifically in this case by using Vault for secrets operations, right? And because essentially applications need secrets to operate, right? So a secrets management service should really be an integral component of any internal developer platform.
Yeah, so Kevin, many of my customers are familiar with platform teams, right? But does the HVD provide any more detail of an approach where we can take implementing this internal development platform, enable a wider set of users to basically have access to it?
Yeah. That's a great question. Actually, let me move on onto the next slide here and talk a bit more about people and process, right? When we talk about people and process and the HVD goes into it, it typically breaks down into a few different teams and responsibilities, right? And we'll recommend a producer consumer model in a shared services setup, right? Where you have those producers that have a role in kind of configuring the system to meet the needs of, many different consumers internally, right? And typically that producer team is like your platform team, and they'll be responsible for things like operating Vault as a tier 0 app or a mission critical service, whatever you want to call it, right? They will ensure that workflows are clearly defined for application teams to be able to safely and securely consume Vault. And then they'll actually work on building and offering enablement to those consumers or application teams internally. Typically, again, it's kind of that platform team that's responsible for it. And they may also be responsible for kind of overseeing any additional shared tools and services to ensure that they support these golden workflows for integrating with Vault and promoting the adoption of standardized ways of using Vault across the organization, right? That's all we mean when we say golden workflow, right? It's a golden workflow is a standardized way of using, in this case, Vault across the organization that we know is secure and scales, right? You want it to be applicable to many different teams internally, right? Not just sort of a custom thing that you build one time for a single use case. That platform team also typically works to establish standards and best practices for Vault adoption to kind of promote consistency and minimize errors across projects, right? Really looking to, improve efficiencies and reduce the chance of operational disruptions. And then finally, you want that team to act as a central resource, right? So they're providing kind of expert knowledge to project teams internally. They may set up lunch and learns. They may build documentation, right? Whatever they can do to reduce learning curves. And then finally, ideally they're looking to automate this as well too, right? So taking an infrastructure as code approach to kind of accelerate time to market for new features and applications. So that's a lot for the producer platform team, right? The consumers, on the other hand, really refer to any team within the organization that utilizes the shared services provided by the platform team. So typically these are application development teams who are doing things like, initiating requests for access to Vault or configuring their applications to integrate with Vault.
Yeah, one more thing, Kevin. Could we walk through what a practical example would look like where the platform team might do, or rather might enable Vault as a service?
Yeah, sure. So a typical example would be the platform team building a Terraform module, which works to access secrets from Vault, and then standardizing that for application teams to use, right? So the application teams don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of Vault, but are more or less provided with a way to consume Vault secrets, right? So this platform team may build a golden workflow for this sort of standardized, repeatable process, that looks to ultimately, achieve some task or achieve some desired outcome, right? And that's something that you want to be, or have well documented internally and obviously tested before it's rolled out to app teams. And ideally, more efficient and secure than it is to do it manually, right? Within Vault, they're typically related to one of two things, or maybe both at the same time. It's either federating identity or managing secrets, right? So like the example before of a golden workflow for developers to consume secrets from Vault, right? In that case, the platform team would be, empowering app dev teams to independently store and modify secrets, right? While the platform team still maintains centralized management and control over everything within Vault, right? So no one is like writing their own policy to access Vault from the application side, right? The platform team oversees and governs that workflow so they can ensure compliance with, internal policies and security requirements and best practices, right? So if you were building an app that needed a secret, say at deploy time, right, then, as a platform team, you can feel comfortable letting application teams consume from Vault because they're using your module and you wrote it and it's good and secure and it's hopefully passed, internal checks and balances, right? And then as an application team, you're going to feel comfortable because this is essentially a module interface to Vault that's easy for you to use, right? And you're going to be, have the understanding that it follows your internal best practices for utilizing Vault that again has been sort of blessed by InfoSec or security. And in some circumstances, you may not even know that you're using Vault as the backend system in this case, right? And you might not care. I've had customers who have built this sort of setup in such a way that end users are merely reaching out to an API to post or get secrets without even knowing that Vault's on the other side, right? And they had it tied in. This specific customer, I think, used Kerberos for authentication internally across their organization for a number of different things. And they tied that into Vault, and any user that had had a Kerberos profile internally was able to just reach out to an API, and then on the back end, it was having them centrally auth into Vault, and they were able to manage secrets that way, right? But they were all just provided with their own back end path, and they didn't even necessarily need to know kind of the intrinsic detail of Vault to be able to actually use Vault as the backend system. And so that's something, we may classify as an application onboarding workflow, right? A golden workflow for onboarding an application to Vault, where that workflow really kind of involves determining the location within Vault where secrets for a particular application would be stored, right? And then ensuring that app can consume those secrets by kind of automating the authentication and policy needed for access. Likewise, you could have workflows that you create for developers or humans, right? Workflows where you need to kind of empower developers to maybe make modifications or updates to secrets stored in Vault, or more likely maybe for enabling new types of capabilities within Vault, right? Say a new secrets engine or whatever it may be that they would like enabled, right? So it may be requesting new functionality within Vault to actually be enabled. And those would be what we classify more as human workflows, and there are some nice recommendations in the HVD for those as well too. But ultimately, right, it's about the teams and responsibilities they have, and then enabling workflows between those teams that follow the standards that our organization sets, right, all through the use of these, what we call golden workflows, that are really enabled by the platform team and then consumed by development teams. Okay, so I know that's maybe a lot to take in, and we'll come back to this self-service workflow stuff in a little bit, but kind of moving ahead in the HVD as far as what comes, what section comes next, right? A question we often get asked is, how should we organize our hierarchy within Vault, right? This is something we get asked about all the time by our customers, especially when it comes to kind of namespaces and that sort of a thing, right? So first, just to give an understanding of how Vault is laid out, right? We've got our root or admin namespace at the top level. And once in that namespace, an admin can create multiple namespaces, just like a folder structure, essentially nesting them, right? And each namespace, has its own authentication methods and secrets engines and policies, kind of specifying who or what can access what secrets, right? So the first recommendation, and as we suggest, as kind of depicted there in that left-hand graphic, right, is that you configure an auth method for human users within that top-level namespace, right? And this is where your admins can kind of define policies necessary for granting those users access to different sub namespaces, right? And the real rationale there, right, behind that recommendation is to consolidate all human access into a kind of a single centralized location within the cluster, right? And typically, organizations will utilize an identity management platform like Active Directory or Okta for managing that access as well too. Then, when it comes to actually configuring Vault, right, we recommend, again, that you use Terraform to automate as much as you can and really look to standardize on it, right? On a small scale, it might be manageable to do it manually, right? But as the sort of scale and complexity of your use cases increase, you're going to want some form of automation to help keep up with the increasing management overhead, right? Imagine a situation where you need to map many, say, OIDC provider groups to Vault groups across, multiple environments, right? Like dev, test, stage, and prod, right? Real quick, that can become, significant operational overhead without some sort of an automated process in place. So by doing that, you're going to get a lot of the benefits from Terraform and infrastructure as code by doing it that way, right? You're kind of increased productivities and, promoting repeatable processes and, reducing human error and all that, right? But something really worth calling out is that you're now managing state in Terraform, right, to track the current configuration of Vault, right? So by using Terraform to deploy Vault, your Terraform state will actually be a representation of your Vault config, right? And so for admin teams who manage the configuration of Vault, right, as you can see in that sort of second graphic there, we typically recommend that the Vault admin team set up, a Vault admin config repository in a version control system, in a repo like in Git, GitHub, GitLab, whatever it may be, where Vault configuration is stored as Terraform files, right? And then any change to the Vault config is applied to the repo, and then changes are then sort of propagated to Vault out in the real world, right? So that, typically follows your best practices for kind of a GitOps flow, but also provides for some easy migration, I guess I should say promotion, between various application lifecycle environments, right? If you want to make changes to lower level environments first and propagate them up and promote them through to your higher environments, right? So that's it at a high level, right? Now let's say we have things set up, right? How do we make sure that we're enabled for consumption, right? Well, if we're sort of configured as I just laid out, right, all the various business units are going to kind of authenticate via that top level auth method, right? And then their membership will dictate which namespaces and secrets engines paths they should have access to. And I'll note, obviously, this is just from a user side. I know you're probably saying, great, that's for people. It's only really half the battle, right? What about kind of machines and apps and that sort of a thing? And I promise we'll get to that in a little bit. Taby's going to cover that. But just to end on a last note here while we're still in, talking organization, right, is that I wanted to make sure I covered kind of environments, as I was mentioning, right? And what our recommendation is there when it comes to Vault. And the recommendation simply is that you should have a non-production environment for Vault, right? So something to essentially withstand longer periods of downtime without business impacts, right? Allowing for kind of safe examination and troubleshooting of new configurations and policies, and allowing you to update or test things in Vault without putting your business at risk, right? And like all testing environments, right, that config should really match production as closely as possible, so you can mimic behaviors, right? Additionally, if your organization has very tight security requirements, you may actually separate out development secrets onto its own non-prod cluster to really look to prevent like any commingling of production and development secrets at all, right? So we have some folks who do that as well too. And then finally, within this section, as far as the onboarding workflow for teams and users, it should really be as pain-free as possible, right? But not necessarily a full-fledged kind of self-service for onboarding new app teams, right? We still want some gates within your Vault kind of admin workflow to ensure that we're, not approaching limits or overstressing the system, or, generally having people trying to do things they shouldn't be able to do.
Yeah. Could we walk through what a customer onboarding workflow might look like, Kevin?
Yeah, I'd love to. So ripped out from the HVD is this graphic here as well too. This is one of my other favorite sections that we have, right? So as I stated earlier, right, we want kind of the onboarding workflow for new teams to be as automated as possible to reduce human errors, and also to ensure scalability as adoption of Vault matures, right? So here's an example of an onboarding workflow built using Terraform Enterprise, right? And there's two main personas with this approach, right? We have the Vault administrators, and then we have the application owners, right? So basically aligning with what we talked about before with the platform team and, kind of your producer consumer model, right? Where the admins are, responsible for kind of Vault cluster level configs, maybe setting up audit logs, mounting auth methods and secrets engines and what have you. They're also going to be creating common Terraform modules for application owners to consume as part of those golden workflows we've talked about. And they'll also be approving pull requests coming from the app teams in the Vault consumer repositories, right? Git repositories. So first off, kind of looking at that middle row here, right? You've got your Vault admins who manage, cluster level configs using Terraform through, a Vault admin configuration Git repository. And that repository may map to multiple Terraform Enterprise workspaces using a version control workflow, right? You might have one workspace per environment, like dev, test, stage, and prod, right? And you have admins who are, managing config and committing changes to the repo, which then drive those deployments through Terraform workspaces in Terraform Enterprise, right? So that's one part of it. Then, as I mentioned previously, if we take a look at the top row up here, right, the admins are responsible for creating those common Terraform modules to be consumed by app teams, right, where each module is going to align to a pre-approved Vault use case and then provisions the resources necessary for consumers to access and work with Vault, right? So, for example, kind of as we were talking about before, you might have a module for consuming Vault static secrets, and that's actually going to provision the appropriate Vault policies and identity groups and auth method roles and what have you, that would be required for them to use, the key value secrets engine within Vault, right? And so again, that essentially serves as an interface to Vault, right? Abstracting away a lot of the configuration details from application owners, and then maybe exposing, only a few necessary input parameters, right? But using kind of sensible defaults elsewhere. And then, specific to kind of onboarding, if we take a look at the bottom row here, right? The Vault consumer repo kind of row we have there. This is how we onboard additional application teams. So app owners would actually request access to Vault by using those common Terraform modules, right? And then making a pull request to the Vault consumer repository, which is actually owned by the admin team, right? So those pull requests are submitted to the consumer repo. They're kind of reviewed and hopefully approved by the admin team. Once that PR is approved and merged and committed, right, Terraform is going to kick off a workflow to apply the changes to Vault, right? Essentially getting the application team everything they need for access to Vault, right? And in doing so, that app team may also get a consumer repo, right, where it's going to kind of store the code that's specific for that application team, right? And again, consequently, they're going to have their workspace in TFE that will, manage state for their Vault config there as well too, right? And then the app teams, right? So this is just config and kind of setup we're talking about. The app teams would then use the Vault UI or CLI or API, right, to actually manage secrets to ensure, that you're not committing secrets in your code into the repositories, right? So the repos are for config, and then secrets are managed, right? They're read, written, rotated, whatever you'd like. That's all done through the UI, the CLI, or the API. So essentially, it's this sort of GitOps approach where you have, consumer app teams that are requesting access or requesting for changes to be made to Vault config. maybe it's the first time and they want access. Maybe they're, requesting a new secrets engine be enabled. Maybe it's a request for policy and access updates, right? Those changes are basically reviewed by the admin team through a pull request. And then when approved, you have an automated Vault deployment or configuration change to provide those app teams with the functionality and access that they need. And then wrapping up, getting into some of the initial configuration sections as well within the HVD, right? Before you actually begin populating Vault with secrets, there are some, additional kind of initial configuration tasks that need to be completed. And this section within the HVD addresses those things, right? So specifically, this covers configuring audit logs, provides some additional detail on namespace design and the recommended structure of Vault, and then some best practices related to configuring authentication methods, right? So related to audit logs, right, there are recommendations on the audit devices you can use, how to handle log rotation, which is key because Vault will actually cease operating if the audit logs cannot be written, right? And that's by design, it's a safeguard, right? Since we don't want anyone operating Vault without an audit trail on what they're doing, right? And there are recommendations on kind of setting up multiple audit devices as well for improved availability within the system, right? Recommendations around, what you can do for data integrity, those sorts of things, right? And it's not just process related as well, but actual commands and configs that you can run to enable these methods that we speak about. On the namespace side, right, we talk about, again, some more detail on how you can use them for tenant isolation, how you should set up the initial namespace structure to secure the root namespace. So only super admins can access, Vault's system APIs. We also talk about some anti-patterns, which I particularly like this section as well too, right? We often get questions around, kind of benchmarking of Vault, or what are the limits and maximums of Vault's backend storage, right? So we go over some kind of anti-patterns, things that you should avoid, right? And, specifically the kind of performance impacts that your namespace may design, or excuse me, that your namespace design may have on Vault, right? Then similar to audit logs, there are some sample commands and configs for setting up namespaces. And then lastly, we cover the authentication piece, right? So how users can auth using OIDC and LDAP, how admin policies should be set up and example policies you can use, and then how to actually configure OIDC and the LDAP auth methods with some examples, right? And more specifically, how they should actually be tied to your organization's identity management system, right? So you really have one place to manage your users. So it's, kind of less likely that users either get stranded in Vault in a, maybe a group they've moved on from, or just as a legacy user that no longer works within the organization.
Yes, so let's talk about authentication for applications. Now, in order for a client to interact with Vault's API, it must pass an authentication token along with the request. Now, an authentication token is granted after a client proves its identity to Vault via an authentication method. So for a human user, providing a proof of identity is pretty straightforward. You supply a user ID and password. However, this begins to become more challenging for applications because you need a secure way to provide those initial credentials for the application to authenticate with Vault. And this is something Kevin mentioned at the beginning of his presentation.
Yeah, Taby, this is a huge one. Folks ask about this all the time. Secret zero, how do we tackle secret zero? How does an application machine essentially prove that it's a legitimate recipient for a secret so that it can acquire a Vault token to be able to kind of do its operation? Are you able to kind of expand on that a bit?
Absolutely. So there are two approaches to securely authenticate a secret consumer, right? You could make use of a platform integration, or you could make use of a trusted orchestrator to supply those credentials. So if we take some time to walk through the platform integration model, right, it will look like this, right? Vault will trust the underlying platform, whether that be Ali Cloud, AWS, Azure, or GCP, And that underlying platform will assign a token or a cryptographic identity, such as an IAM token or a signed JOT token, to a virtual machine, a container, or a serverless function. Vault will then use that provided identifier to verify the identity of the client by interacting with, again, that underlying platform. And once that client's identity is verified, Vault will return a token to the client, and this token is key. It's bound to the client's identity and policies and will subsequently allow the client access to secrets within Vault. So suppose you have an application running on a virtual machine, say in an AWS EC2 instance. When that instance is started, an IAM token is provided via the machine local metadata URL. Now, that IAM token is provided to Vault as a part of the AWS authentication method, and it's used to log in and authenticate the client. So Vault uses that token to query the AWS API and verify its validity and fetch additional metadata about said instance, things like account ID, VPC ID, AMI, region. Now, all these properties are used again to determine the identity of the client and to distinguish between different roles. Is it a web server? Is it an API server? So once you've validated and assigned a role, Vault will generate again that token that is appropriately scoped and return it to the client. And all future requests from the clients are going to be made with that associated token, and it will allow Vault to efficiently authenticate the client and check for proper authorizations when consuming secrets. Okay, let's talk about the trusted orchestrator, right? In this model, your orchestrator will have already authenticated against Vault with privileged permissions. Your orchestrator will launch new applications and inject some mechanism that these applications can be used to authenticate with Vault. And this could be authenticating via what we call APRL, right? A PKI certificate, a token, among other things. So let's look at an example, right? So if you have Terraform being used as your trusted orchestrator, right? In the trusted orchestrator approach, Terraform already has a Vault token, meaning that it has already authenticated against your Vault service. And so this token that it possesses has enough capabilities to generate additional tokens or create new credentials. Now, we all know, or I assume we all know, that Terraform can interact with platforms such as VMware to provision new virtual machines. So what happens then? Terraform creates and injects an APRL credential, APRL being one of the very many authentication methods that we support, right? So it will create and inject an APRL credential into a new machine, and this will extend trust to that machine from Terraform, allowing it or its application to authenticate against Vault using those injected credentials. Excuse me. So let's move on to static secrets. So once you have the initial cluster configuration of your Vault service completed and you have your authentication methods enabled as a Vault admin, right, you are ready to enable your first use case. This is often the creation of static secrets and their secure storage and retrieval. So for this, you will utilize Vault's key value secrets engine. And this engine stores arbitrary static secrets. But what is a secrets engine, right? It is a Vault component which stores or generates and encrypts secrets. And you can think of them really as plugins that, once enabled, allow you to meet your security needs. Now, what is a secret? It's anything that you want to tightly control access to, and it be anything from passwords to database connection strings to API keys. Now, Vault provides, again, a unified interface to any secret while providing tight access controls and recording a detailed audit log. This is key in understanding what the Vault service actually is. Now, the section of the guide that is termed static secrets basically walks you through what you should consider when laying out your secret schema. This is very important. What you should consider when you're creating your policies for authorization, again, a key component of the service. And lastly, what you should consider when you're planning your secret consumption strategy. Okay, now on to visibility and management. This again is a section in the guide that will focus on the data that Vault will generate, including things like telemetry and metrics, operational logs, and audit logs. Now, these components are essential for ensuring that security, performance, and compliance of your Vault environment are being met. It's important to also realize and understand that Vault itself does not offer a solution for aggregating, visualizing, or alerting on telemetry or audit data. This section of the guide is intended to cover configuration, monitoring, and that utilization of Vault's data to enhance your secrets management system. So if I briefly touch on Vault's telemetry, it's a feature within the service that serves as an essential tool for monitoring and optimizing the performance of the Vault server itself. It collects those internal metrics and performance data that's related to things like server resource utilization. And this could include things like memory and CPU usage, your request rates, your response times, and more, right? Now, as you can guess, right, these metrics help Vault admins in their capacity planning. Again, this is very key. It also helps them with performance optimization and troubleshooting server-related issues. And this telemetry data is typically exposed through various telemetry syncs like Prometheus or InfluxDB. We also have StatsD. Now, if I move on quickly to the Vault's audit device log, right, they will provide details for troubleshooting, right? Things like counts for operations against a specific Vault endpoint. Remember again that Vault is API backed. It could also be, doing things like what are the IP addresses of hosts responsible for generating specific errors in your Vault service? You want to keep an eye on these things. And they will contain request and response data for every interaction within the Vault API. Granted, there are exceptions, there are paths that have exceptions. The HVD walks into detail as to what the specific paths are. Again, the section of the guide specific to audit device logging explores again the details of the resulting audit logs and how to leverage the data for troubleshooting. Okay. Another section of the guide, which is the standard operational procedures, right? And this is specific to the Vault Enterprise version, which is the self-hosted variant of Vault, right? And when you go through the HVD, you will realize that unless stated otherwise, the capabilities and features are applicable to all the editions of Vault. If not, it will explicitly tell you this is only applicable to HCP Vault, and on and so forth. Now, when you talk about the standard operational procedures, as you can imagine, these procedures include things like data backup, restoration, and system upgrades, and it goes into details as to what this looks like for a Vault service on Vault Enterprise. Okay, we are coming to an end of the HVDs as specific to Vault. What do we expect and hope that you've gotten from this, right? And will get from the HVDs? Well, we aim to achieve 3 functional objectives, as you can see on that slide right there. We aim to help you accelerate your time to value, reduce your risk profile, and reduce cost. This is the fundamental objective of the Vault service and the Vault Enterprise solution. And by that, I mean the paid solution for Vault. Okay, so the Lunch and Learn series that we've been having for the past 2 weeks. We had one for Terraform last week, and we are having one for Vault. We intend that we will have a lot more coming up. So, watch this space, and we will let you know as soon as we have the next series available. Thank you. So I think we have a bit more time right now. We have about 11 minutes, so we can open up the floor for questions if there are any. I'm
not seeing any Vault specific. I know seems to be an issue with the Uber Eats voucher, and Vani just posted some instructions on how you can you'll be able to apply that. It looks like you will need to apply it to a past order, basically order and then apply it after the fact, but that seems to be a workaround right now. But anything Vault related, as Taby said, we do have a few minutes if there are any further questions. There's one. Vault can be hands-off only, or you provide assistance outside of setup. So, yeah, so establishing setup. So, yeah, I can talk on that. There's a couple things there. So, this guide or these guides are meant to help you with the initial install and config, right? This is for something that for our customers to be able to take this and do it on their own. Now, having said that, there's two different flavors of Vault, right? So we have HCP Vault, which takes away a lot of that, the initial kind of install and config that's needed, right? You simply are able to just deploy a Vault cluster to the cloud, and you don't have to worry about any of the underlying kind of host configurations, anything along those lines. You don't have to worry about version upgrades, right? That's all managed by us, and you're more or less provided with Vault as a service. It's not a full-fledged SaaS. It's more of a managed service, right? So if you're familiar with like Amazon's RDS, it's a similar kind of offering to that, right? Where you're provided with an endpoint to be able to configure and use your Vault instance. Now, if you do need help with configuration or even installation of Vault Enterprise, we have a full network of, well, first off, we do have an internal professional services team that can help with that. We have a number of different kind of Vault fast track services to help with things like initial install and then tackling specific use cases for Vault. And then we have a vast partner ecosystem as well too, to help with kind of advanced, more than kind of the initial few weeks of getting onboarded, right? So we can plug you in with partners who have actually been vetted by us and passed our kind of internal certifications to be a partner for Vault to help with services.
Yeah, and additionally, we also have that developer online website that walks you through the different use case scenarios for Vault. This is specific to getting your current team acclimated in LAN. We also have an academy onboarding session to get 1 or 2 members of your team to become quote unquote experts in the Vault service. So those are 2 things you could utilize to just get people up and running, right? We can facilitate both of those. I do see another question about integrating Vault open source and Vault Enterprise. We do not recommend this, right? Yeah. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay. Anything else that we want to pop in the chat?
Yeah, I would say it looks like Patrick answered it as well too, but the services, right? From if you want to get a team acclimated and learn, there's Enterprise Academy that we have where it's like a classroom setting over multiple days. That's an option, as well as additional sort of training services that are available.
Can you switch from one version to the other? What do you mean? The Vault binary version or the moving from Vault Community Edition to Vault Enterprise or HCP Vault? If it's a binary version, it's simply a matter of grabbing the binary from the releases vault.hashicorp.com website and plopping it into your Vault onboarding or implementation workflow. Oh, wonderful. Dan is responding to that. There you go. This is what a wonderful tag team looks like. Six more minutes. If you have questions, we are here. Utilize us.
Oh, recordings of the lunch and learns. Yeah, so there will be a kind of post-webinar email going out from Dania. So she'll send that along with the the links to our HVDs. You'll get a copy of the deck and a link for the recording as well. I think a similar one should have gone out for last week, but yeah, perhaps Dania, we could probably include the links for both of them in the follow-up email that goes out after this session as well too. I don't see why not. So yeah, keep an eye out for a follow-up email from us in the next few days.
Yeah. If we have no
Okay.
more questions, we can wrap up early. Thank you for your time. Dan put in the developer website link there for Vault Docs. That's a useful and handy tool to reach, to go out to and have a look at as well, for those of you who might not be familiar with that.
Yeah, and thanks again for joining us today. I'd urge you to dive into the HVDs in more detail. And feel free to ask questions, reach out to us, or discuss with your account teams on how you can better use the HVDs to enable HashiCorp products internally. Thanks again. Take care. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.